So now that we've established the railroad and we have connected the western side of our nation to the Midwest and the East Coast, we now have all this empty land that is easily accessible. And this section, Western Agriculture, is going to cover how do we settle this land, what are the laws that are put in place, and how do we move forward in establishing the rest of the Western states. We have 5 vocab terms for this section: cattle drive, vaqueros, cow towns, moral acts, and sodbuster. So, like we talked about back when Texas was part of Mexico, a huge part of their culture are cattle ranches, cow farms, essentially. And that doesn't change when Texas becomes part of the United States, because cattle are a great food source, specifically the Texas Longhorns. Part of the reason why University of Texas Austin is the Texas Longhorns is because of these Longhorns. They are the ideal food source for this region of the country. They don't take a ton of resources to raise or to grow, and yet they provide tons of meat. These Longhorns are huge. They're about 400 to 500 pounds each. Now, if you have a ton of animals that are 400 to 500 pounds and you need to transport hundreds of them across the country, you're going to need something like a railroad to actually do it. And since at this time period there are no railroads in Texas, they need to drive these cattle or move these cattle north to Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, where all the rail sites are, where all the train stations that can actually transport these cattle are located. And that's what these ranchers are going to do. They're going to move their herds hundreds of miles north to these railroad lines. But they're not going to do it alone. They're going to do it with the help of cowboys or cowhands. These men are Civil War veterans, Mexican Americans who stuck around after Texas became part of the United States, and freed African Americans. Because remember, we are past the Civil War now. Slavery is illegal. Everyone is free in the United States. We'll go back in the future and talk more about the Civil War in an upcoming unit. These cowhands are going to draw a lot of inspiration from the Spanish and Mexican vaqueros, and they're going to use a lot of the same tools as them. Things like lassos, whips, guns, a lot of the same tools that these Mexican cowboys used and were successful with. American cowboys are going to do the same thing. And going on these cattle drives was an incredibly difficult job. These cowhands are pretty much working 18-hour days. They're only having about 4 to 5 hours of rest a night. If you count, the time that they need to set up camp at night and then break down camp in the morning, you're really only getting about 4 to 5 hours of sleep. And they have to deal with a number of dangers. The first one, the most dangerous, is stampedes. A stampede is when one animal gets spooked, they get scared, and they start running from whatever they perceive as the danger. All the other cow and cattle around them, they see this one longhorn sprinting. They realize, oh crap, he's running from danger. I better run too. And all of a sudden, you have hundreds of them sprinting to wherever because they're trying to escape whatever they think they are in danger from. This stampede can be super deadly. If you've ever seen Lion King, you'll know that in the scene where, spoiler alert, Mufasa dies, he's run over by a stampede of wildebeest. This is super deadly for the cowboys if they get caught underneath one. This is also pretty deadly for the cows as well. As weird as it sounds, cows are kind of dumb. They will keep running no matter what. Even if there's a cliff in front of them, even if there's a wall, they would, if given the chance, in the middle of a stampede, run over a cliff or run off a cliff. So because of this, these cowhands have to be able to control and essentially end these stampedes. The way they would do this is they would find the lead cow, the one that's leading the charge. They would lasso onto him, pull him left or right, cause him to run in a circle. The stampede ends up running in a circle until they tire themselves out and the stampede ends. So that's one danger they have to work through. Another danger is cattle thieves. This is why cowboys typically are known as gunslingers. They have revolvers. It's because these longhorns are very expensive. A modern day longhorn is worth thousands of dollars. So this is going to be a potentially very lucrative opportunity for these thieves to steal a longhorn. So cowboys have to be vigilant and wary about that as well. They also have to worry about thunderstorms, not only getting electrocuted, but also thunder's loud. If you guys have dogs or cats or any other small animals during the 4th of July, when you have fireworks going off during thunderstorms, they're going to get spooked. They're going to freak out. And if you have cattle freaking out, next thing you know, we have a stampede again. You also have to worry about fires as well. It's very dry out here in Texas. It's very dry in the Midwest area that we're talking about right now. And because of that, you could see brush fires, which could, once again, startle the cows and cause a stampede, or could just burn you to death. One of the two. Overall, very dangerous job. Now, there is an upside to this. It's not all bad being a cowboy. On your journey, you do have some places where you can rest. These are called cow towns. Sometimes they'll show up in Abilene, Texas, Wichita, Caldwell, Dodge City. A lot of these locations are going to develop as a rest stop or a pit stop for these men riding north. They're going to have dance halls where you can hang out and dance with some local ladies. They're going to have saloons where you could hang out and drink with your buddies, hotels, restaurants, everything a cowboy needs to rest up for a few days before continuing on his journey. But eventually, these cowboys will get to their destination, they'll drop off the cows, they'll make the journey back, and about a year later, they'll do it all over again. This is where we're going to stop for our first knowledge check. How did vaqueros influence cowhand culture in the United States? At the same time that we have cowboy culture in Texas, we also have a ton of land out west that has now been connected for the first time to the wider United States, and travel is much easier than it was before. If you remember, the Oregon Trail, very deadly, took a lot of time, but now that we have railroads, it's going to be a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot cheaper, and safer. So many more people have the opportunity to move out west. And the U.S. government knows this. So in 1862, they passed the Homestead Act. And the idea behind the Homestead Act was the government is going to give out free land. You could get 160 acres of free land, which, to give you some context, 160 acres is about 3 times the size of Newhart, if you include the entire campus and the fields around it and some of the parking lots. So it's about the size of our school, stretching the boundaries a little bit, times 3. It's not a huge piece of land, but it's not tiny either. And the U.S. government is going to give this to you for free as long as you check a couple boxes. Box number 1, you have to be the head of a household. That means that that would be like your parents or whoever you live with. They're the head of your household. They would qualify. You can't have fought for the Confederacy, so you couldn't have fought on the side of the rebels during the Civil War. And you have to pay a small filing fee, something like 50 cents at that time period, would be about 20 bucks today. And you would need to have improved the land over 5 years. This improvement could take a lot of different forms. This could be farming on the land. This could be clearing out the land. This could be building a house or any other structure, raising animals, livestock, longhorns, for example. Or if you live near water, you could build a bridge or build some type of path or road on the areas where there's land. As long as you can prove that you've made this land better, that you've improved this land over 5 years, the U.S. government would give it to you for free because they want as many people out west as possible, and free stuff is usually the best way to get people to do things. And because of this, about 500,000 Americans are going to set up farms by the year 1900. Now, that being said, only about 20% of a land that's available is going to go to small farmers. And this is because farms cost money to set up. Obviously, you need to buy the seed, you need to buy the animals if you're raising animals, you need to buy the farming equipment, the tools, maybe you have to hire employees. This is going to be an expensive startup cost. So because of this, about 80% of the land given out during the Homestead time period was taken by large companies who would then set up the land themselves, maybe split up the 160 acres into smaller chunks, and then they would sell those to farmers at expensive prices. So while we are getting people settling in the West, it's mostly these large companies setting up these homesteads. And we start to see the West fill up extremely quickly until there's only one real state left with any land available. And that's Oklahoma. And this is where the last major land rush occurs. This happens in 1889, April 22nd to be exact. On April 22nd, 100,000 people line up on the Oklahoma border. And once the starting pistol rings out, it literally becomes a race. These people, like you can see in the picture above, they are racing to find the best spots of land to stake their claim so that they can build a life for themselves out west. Now, that being said, not everyone's going to wait in line. Of course, some people are going to sneak in early. They're going to stake their claims early. And these people become known as Sooners, like the Oklahoma Sooners, the football team, or the university's football team. So this is once again another example where we have a historical event inspiring a sports team or school mascot in the past. We got the Oklahoma Sooners, Texas Longhorns, San Francisco 49ers, and it's not just the areas we're talking about. Later on, we're going to see the Pittsburgh Steelers, the football team named after the steel industry. Later on, once we start seeing the Longhorns getting sent up north, we have Green Bay's meatpacking industry, hence the Green Bay Packers. This is a pretty common occurrence throughout this time period, is historical, either events or jobs or groups of people end up becoming the inspiration for some of these sports mascots. So let's shift to California. It's still the Homestead Act. People are still getting free land. And in California, only about 10% of that is going to homesteaders. The other 90% is going to these large agricultural companies. And a lot of the 49ers who come to California to seek their fortune in gold end up sticking around, like we talked about. And what they're going to do now, the gold is all dried up, so to speak. There's no more gold to mine. They're going to shift to a new type of job, a new career. And this, for many of them, especially immigrants from Korea, Japan, China, the Philippines, India, they're going to become migrant farm workers, meaning that they are moving all around California, depending on what time of year it is, to harvest the crops. A little bit of info about California. We are the largest fruit producer in the United States. We are one of the largest producers of strawberries, oranges, grapes, avocados, and a number of other fruits, and obviously vegetables as well, almonds as well, a number of agricultural products. So if you have an orange grove or an apple orchard or a vineyard and you're growing grapes for raisins or for wine or just for grapes in general, you're going to need employees when harvest time comes around. And this is where these migrant farm workers come in. In some ways, this is a win-win because if you are, picking strawberries for a little bit, you don't need to work on that farm all year round because it's only harvest time for a couple weeks, if not a couple months. So these migrant farm workers are going to constantly move around during different harvest times in order to maintain their employment. This is also great for the farmers because they don't have to pay these employees all year round. They only need to pay them when they actually need them, harvest time. So on one hand, this is really, really good. But on the other hand, unfortunately, because a lot of the people taking these jobs are immigrants, they don't really have the skills necessary to really build a life for themselves. If you are a poor immigrant coming from another country and you don't speak English very well, or you don't have much of a formal education, something like migrant farm work is going to be great for you in the sense that it doesn't require a lot of skills that you don't yet have. So it's something you can very easily start working in. At the same time, it's going to be very difficult work. You're always moving around, which is obviously a downside. You can't put down roots, and it doesn't pay very much. So because of this, migrant farm work is typically going to be mostly a job for immigrants, especially those with English skills that aren't yet at the level where they need to be to find more gainful employment, and also for immigrants who really don't have an education level. This is still the case today. There's tons of migrant farm workers still in California, but these days they tend to come from Central or South America. So a lot of them end up speaking Spanish, which is why they stick around in California, because California, along with Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, right along the Mexico border, tons of Spanish speakers in these states. We have about 30% of people in California are at least semi-fluent in Spanish, which makes it an easy way for people who don't speak English to easily transition to our country. So they end up sticking around as migrant farm workers. During this time period as well, we're also going to see a rise in mechanization, a rise in machines. And this is stuff like steam tractors or other mechanized farm equipment that is going to make farming more efficient and easier and more profitable for these large industrial agricultural companies. And the US government realizes this. They realize that mechanization is going to become this huge thing and make farming even better. And because of this, in 1862, same year that they passed the Homestead Act, they're going to pass the Morrill Land Grant Colleges Act. And what this does is it gives public land to states to found universities. And these universities, these colleges, they emphasize an education in agriculture. That could be agricultural science, agriculture in general, mechanics to help, create more tractors and other machines, but also they're in the effort to give their students a well-rounded education. They're also going to school them in the classics, that's the Greek and Roman texts, things, and then also, more modern classics like Shakespeare. And they're also going to offer courses on military tactics. So these colleges are set up in the 1860s with the idea of helping modernize farming. They're going to help farmers start experimenting with different types of crops. So we might see the very first examples of gene splicing or GMOs or selective breeding. If you guys remember from science class, either 6th or 7th grade, Gregor Mendel with his flowers and his pea pods, he would take the dominant genes, the dominant alleles, to get better tasting fruit or larger fruit or different colors of flowers that he thought were prettier. We're going to do the same thing. We want bigger strawberries, redder strawberries, strawberries with more juice, strawberries with more flavor, strawberries that are bug resistant or weather resistant. So we are going to selectively breed these strawberries to get the best kind possible so that we are making the most money and providing the most nutrition and calories and all the other benefits of food to the Americans, or to our nation as a whole. And part of the reason that we're able to do this is because of the 1862 Morrill Land Grant Colleges Act. That's what really gives us the resources, both in California, but also in the rest of the nation, to really take the time to develop agriculture as an industry. And that's why today, the United States is actually one of the largest, if not the largest, exporter of grains and most other foodstuffs to the world. We have a ton of agriculture, especially in the Midwest, this area being founded and being settled during this time period, the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. So this leads us to knowledge check number 2 for this section. Who was profiting most from the Homestead Act? So the Homestead Act is allowing people to set up their small farms. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about the people living on these small farms. We call these people homesteaders, and they don't really have much out here. The Great Plains, if you were to take an oval and stick it in the middle of the map of the United States, that's the Great Plains. It's that ovicular, oval-shaped area in the middle of our country. The Great Plains, a little bit about them. They're great for growing crops, great farmland, but it's also relatively dry, and there's not a lot of trees. And because there's not a lot of trees, there's not a lot of wood. And what do we use wood for? Building houses. So if you're moving out west and you can't afford to send timber along to build your house, you basically just have to use whatever's available. And at this time period, in this area of the United States, that is sod. And what sod is it's kind of a mixture of soil and grass roots. So if you've ever gone gardening or weeding and you've pulled like weeds or fruit or vegetables or whatever out of the ground and it has roots, you'll notice that when you pull the roots up, a lot of the soil will stick to the roots. That's kind of the situation we have here. Sod is that combination. The grass roots in the Great Plains are relatively long, relatively strong, and they're going to retain a lot of soil with them when you pull them out of the ground. And this is what we call sod. This is going to be the main building material, as goofy as it sounds, for these houses. People are literally going to build dirt houses. Now, that being said, there are some downsides to building your house out of dirt. The immediate downside that I think of is what happens when it gets wet. When dirt gets wet, it turns into mud. And you don't exactly want muddy floors and a muddy roof and your whole house literally turning to mud. Also, dirt has worms. Dirt has bugs. So your house is going to have worms and bugs literally in the walls. Also, when it's raining, your roof is made of dirt. So, of course, you're going to see some leaking. So even though, it's the main building material, it's not a great one. So it's not going to be for a while that we're going to replace these sod houses with like actual real buildings. But during this time period, people basically just have to make do with what is available. And in this case, it's literally dirt. At the same time, these homesteaders, they've moved out here for farming. And because of the Moral Colleges Land Grant Act, we have a ton of new farming technology. We have sod busting plows. Plows, if you're not familiar with them, if you take your hands and you cup them together, that's roughly what a plow looks like. That's the shape of a plow. Now, this plow would be put into the dirt. You'd either, do it yourself with like a handle, or you would hook it up to one of your horses or your cows or whatever, and you would drag it along, breaking through the sod, breaking through the roots, and and this allows you to basically create a straight line where you can easily plant seeds for your crops. Now, those are plows. Sod busting plows specifically are for breaking through the sod on the top of the ground, on top of the soil in the Great Plains. You've also got windmills. Windmills are, self-explanatory. I'm sure you all know what windmills look like. The wind is obviously going to push the spokes of the windmill, turn a turbine the same way that steam would turn a turbine in a steam engine, and that's going to allow us to pump water from underground to the surface in our wells out here in the Great Plains. We also have reapers. They're kind of like a scythe or a sickle. It's a curved blade on a staff, and you would use that to cut wheat or corn or any other tall standing stalk-like crop. Threshing machines are used to grind down corn or wheat or barley into finer materials. And then binders, you probably haven't seen them, but you've seen what the result of a binder is. If you've ever been to like a pumpkin patch, or if you've ever just seen hay bales, you'll know that they get packed pretty tightly into these kind of squares or cylindrical groupings. Now, hay on its own is it's light, it's fluffy, it kind of gets all over the place. Binders, their job is to condense it into those squares, into those cylinders that you've probably seen before. So all these new materials, all these new technologies are going to be invented during this time period, and they're going to be mechanized and introduced to the people who are creating homesteads on the Great Plains. Now, that being said, living on the Great Plains is not all sunshine and roses. It has got a very dry climate, and when stuff is dry, well, you have a drought, kind of like California. We're always in a drought. This could kill off plants. This could reduce the amount of drinking water we have available, and obviously, it can result in a higher risk of fires. Part of the reason we always have wildfires in California, it's always dry here. Same deal in the Great Plains. Another danger, too, is we don't really have pesticides yet. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we haven't really started selectively breeding for bug resistances, or in this case, grasshopper resistances. So because of this, grasshoppers are going to be a huge menace to these crops during the summer, and if you're not careful, grasshoppers could eat your entire harvest. Another danger, too, is snow. Snow in the winter can bury your animals. It can bury your home. If it buries and gets heavy enough, it could actually collapse your roof, because remember, we're living in dirt homes right now. So overall, pretty challenging life living out here on the plains. I'm sure you're probably wondering to yourself, why would people do this? Why would people move out west and live in a dirt house and deal with all this stuff? It's awful. But as you'll see when we get into Unit 5 and we start looking at what life is like in cities, you'll realize that the people who move out here, these are mostly poor farmers moving out here, their lives in cities were much worse. So for them, this was sort of an upgrade. As weird as it sounds that a dirt house is an upgrade, it really was compared to the horrible conditions that they had to live under when they were in large cities like New York or Chicago or Boston. At the same time, too, we also have some new ways that women are able to express themselves and some new responsibilities that women have now that they are out west. We've talked before about how women have more rights and responsibilities in the West. One of these new responsibilities is they've got to make most of your home goods. You can't go to Bed Bath & Beyond or Target or Walmart or Costco or Pavilions or Ralph's to get the things you need because there are no stores out there. You're basically in the middle of nowhere. Sure, you've got a rail connection, but anything that you're going to ship out west is going to be very expensive. So things like clothing and soap and candles, women are really going to make themselves. Women also have a couple new job opportunities as well. Women are going to start serving as school teachers. During this time period, school really starts to be a thing for the first time. We'll talk about it way more in a lot more detail in next unit, but the quick version is schools at this time period, they are literally one-room schoolhouses, and there is one teacher, and she teaches everything, kind of like an elementary school, except it's not grade by grade. It doesn't matter if you're 5 years old and in kindergarten, if you're 18 and a senior in high school. You are all in one room. You're all learning together. You're all learning basically the same thing. So it's a very different experience to what we have today. And we'll go into this in more detail, and we'll talk about how schooling went from there to here and what it's like today in 2024 in a future unit. Women are also going to start serving as nurses. Back then, go back a couple decades to like the 1830s, 1840s, nursing is almost exclusively a men's job. But it's during the Civil War when we start to see so many men needed on the front lines to fight that we no longer have enough men to be nurses. And all of a sudden, women start stepping up. Women start having the opportunity to branch out into healthcare. At the same time, we also have women starting to make a name for themselves as authors, like Laura Ingalls Wilder. She's going to publish Little House on the Prairie. She grew up during this time period. She lives on a homestead, so she's going to write about her experience. And eventually this becomes a best-selling novel, and then they do end up making a TV show about it. So in a lot of ways, women are seeing an advancement in the opportunities and rights and responsibilities they have, even more than they did initially when they first started moving out west, which is going to lead us into our final knowledge check. What effect does the isolation of Western farms have on women's roles and responsibilities? You're in the middle of nowhere, you're a woman. What types of roles and responsibilities do you have because you're in the middle of nowhere?